Jake Morrison stood on his office balcony and watched the morning sun rise over Haven's Rest. The golden light spread across endless fields of wheat and corn that stretched to the horizon. Children laughed as they ran to school down the clean streets below. Their voices echoed off the white buildings that housed 50,000 happy colonists. For 3,000 years, humans had lived in peace. No wars, no fighting, no death from violence. Jake's great-great-grandmother used to tell stories about the old days when humans fought each other with terrible weapons. Those days seemed like fairy tales now. Modern humans grew food, made art, explored space, and raised their children in safety. Jake smiled as he saw his 12-year-old daughter Katie walking with her friends toward the school. She carried her father's old pendant around her neck, a simple piece of metal that had been passed down through generations. Katie had her mother's bright eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, just like most kids on Haven's Rest. Violence was so far from their minds that they played games about exploring new worlds and finding friendly aliens. Lisa Brooks sat in the colony's defense center, reading reports that never changed. The orbital sensors showed empty space. The communication arrays received only peaceful messages from other human colonies. The defense weapons hadn't been fired in over 200 years. Lisa sometimes wondered why they even bothered to maintain the old military equipment, but the laws required every colony to have basic defenses even if they never used them. Lisa was one of the few people on Haven's Rest who had studied military history. She knew that humans had once been warriors, but that knowledge felt useless now. Her job was more like being a weather observer than a soldier. She watched the stars and reported that everything was calm and safe. That morning started like every other morning for 3,000 years. Children went to school. Adults went to work in the farms and factories. Elderly people sat in parks and told stories. The biggest worry most people had was whether it might rain on the weekend festival. Katie Morrison sat in her classroom learning about art history when the sky changed color. Through the large windows, she saw dark shapes moving against the blue. Her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, stopped talking about ancient paintings and stared outside with confusion. The shapes grew larger. They weren't clouds or birds. They were ships, but not like any human ships Katie had ever seen. These vessels were dark red and covered in sharp edges that looked like weapons. They moved through the sky with the grace of hunting animals. Lisa. Brooks watched her sensor screens light up with warnings she had never seen before. Dozens of unknown ships had appeared in the system without using the normal hyperspace entry points. The ships were huge, much larger than any human vessel. Energy readings showed they carried weapons that could destroy cities. Lisa's hands shook as she activated the emergency communication system. She had trained for this moment but never believed it would happen. Her voice cracked as she spoke into the microphone that would send her words across space to Earth. This is Haven's Rest, colony to Earth Command. We are under attack by unknown alien forces. Repeat, we are under attack. Ships are landing. They have weapons. We need help. Please send help. The first alien ship touched down in the middle of the town square with a sound like thunder. The hull opened and creatures stepped out that made the colonists freeze in terror. They stood 8 feet tall and wore dark armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their movements showed they were built for war. Jake Morrison ran toward the school where his daughter was trapped. The aliens, who called themselves Vorlax, moved through the streets with deadly purpose. They carried energy weapons that could kill a human with one shot. Jake saw his neighbors, people he had known for decades, fall as they tried to run or hide. The Vorlax ignored the adults. They walked past the screaming grown-ups and went straight for the children. Their leader, a massive creature with scars across his armor, pointed at the school and spoke in a voice that sounded like breaking stone. Katie pressed herself against the classroom wall as alien soldiers smashed through the doors. Her classmates cried and held each other, but the aliens showed no emotion. They grabbed children by their arms and dragged them toward their ships. Katie clutched her father's pendant and tried to be brave, but fear filled her chest like ice, water. Jake reached the school just as the aliens brought Katie outside. He called her name and ran toward her, but a Vorlax soldier stepped in his path. The creature raised its weapon, and Jake saw his own death reflected in its dark helmet. His last thought was of his daughter's face as the energy blast ended his life. Lisa Brooks typed desperately as alien ships surrounded the defense center. Her message to Earth had to get through. Humanity had to know what was happening. The communication array sparked and died as Vorlak weapons destroyed it. But not before her final words crossed the vast distance to the homeworld. They're taking the children, all the children. They killed everyone else. The children are all that matter to them. Save our children. The Vorlaks loaded over 3,000 children onto their transport ships. Katie found herself pressed against other scared kids in a dark metal room that smelled like fear and alien machinery. Through a small window, she watched Haven's Rest burning below as the ships lifted into space. The colony that had existed in peace for generations was gone. The Mate adults were dead. The children were prisoners on alien ships heading toward an unknown fate. But Katie Morrison still wore her father's pendant, and deep in her heart she believed that somehow Earth would come for them. The message reached Earth Command in the capital city. Director Amanda Wells read Lisa Brooks' final transmission with growing horror. For the first time in 3,000 years, an alien species had attacked humanity. They had committed murder on a scale that peaceful humans could barely understand. But worse than the killing was the theft. An entire generation of children, stolen from their families and taken into space by creatures that saw humans as nothing, more than resources to be harvested. Amanda Wells stood before the Global Assembly and spoke words that no human leader had needed to say for 3 millennia. We are at war. Director Amanda Wells stood in the Great Hall where human leaders had met for peace talks for 3,000 years. The walls were covered with paintings of flowers and children playing. The ceiling showed images of humans exploring new worlds and making friends with strange creatures. Everything in the room spoke of harmony and hope. Now Amanda held a piece of paper that changed everything. Lisa Brooks' final message was short, but terrible. Aliens had killed everyone on Haven's Rest, except the children. The children were gone, taken by creatures that humans had never seen before. The representatives from every human world sat in shocked silence. These were people who spent their days talking about art festivals and trade agreements. The hardest decision they usually made was where to build new parks. Now they had to think about war, a word their grandparents had barely understood. Amanda's voice was steady, but her hands shook. 3,000 children are prisoners of an alien empire. 50,000 adults are dead. Haven's Rest no longer exists. We must decide what humanity will do. An old man named Dr. Alex Carter sat in the back of the hall taking notes. For 30 years he had worked in the Historical Military Archive, a dusty building where humans kept records of their violent past. Most people thought his job was pointless. Why study ancient wars when humans lived in peace? Now everyone was looking at him. Dr. Carter had gray hair and tired eyes, but his mind held knowledge that humanity desperately needed. He knew about strategies and weapons and the dark arts of making war. He had studied these things because someone had to remember, even if no one wanted to use that knowledge. Dr. Carter, Amanda said, tell us what we're dealing with. The old historian stood up slowly. The aliens call themselves Vorlaks. Our computers found references to them in old exploration records. They rule 17 star systems through fear and violence. They take children from conquered worlds and turn them into soldiers. The hall filled with angry voices. Representatives who had never raised their voices in anger now shouted about revenge and rescue. Dr. Carter waited for quiet, then continued. Humanity has forgotten how to fight, but we haven't lost the ability. Our ancestors were warriors before. They chose peace. The knowledge is still there, buried in our libraries and our genes. We can learn to be dangerous again. Amanda made the decision that would change human history. We will rebuild our military. We will find our children. We will make the Vorlaks pay for what they've done. Admiral Nancy Price received the call while she was inspecting a museum ship in Earth orbit. The vessel was called the Last Warrior, and it hadn't fired its weapons in 800 years. Nancy's family had served in the ceremonial fleet for generations. maintaining ships that everyone hoped would never be needed for real war. Nancy was 50 years old, with silver hair and calm blue eyes. She had studied military tactics the way other people studied poetry as something beautiful but not practical. Now she found herself commanding humanity's first war effort in 3 millennia. "How many ships do we have?" Amanda asked during their first meeting. 200 vessels that can be converted to warships, Nancy replied. "Most are exploration ships or cargo haulers. We'll need to add weapons and armor. The Luna shipyards can do the work, but it will take months." "How many months?" 6 if we work without stopping. Amanda nodded grimly. "The children don't have 6 months. Do it in 4. Across human space, the Great Awakening began. Peaceful research stations became weapons laboratories. Scientists who had spent their lives studying flowers and music now worked on energy shields and missile guidance systems. The change happened so fast it made people dizzy. On Luna, the great shipyards that had built beautiful exploration vessels now echoed with different sounds. Workers who had crafted ships for science and art now built vessels with names like Vengeance and Iron Fist and Child's Promise. The ships were ugly compared to the graceful explorers, but they were built for a different purpose. Captain Ryan Stone commanded a small intelligence ship called Silent Observer. Before the war, his job was to watch distant stars and catalog new planets. Now he led secret missions to gather information about the Vorlak Empire. What his team discovered made everyone afraid. The Vorlaks have enslaved dozens of species, Ryan reported to Admiral Price. But they treat human children differently. They think humans have special qualities that make good soldiers. The children are being taken to the Vorlak homeworld for training. On the alien world called Vorlak Prime, Katie Morrison sat in a cold metal room with hundreds of other human children. The walls were gray and there were no windows. Guards with dark armor watched them constantly. The children were given food that tasted like metal and water that smelled strange. The Vorlak leader who had taken them was called Overlord Thekamar. He was larger than the other aliens, and his armor was covered with symbols that looked like lightning bolts. When he spoke to the children, his voice sounded like grinding stone. "You will learn to fight," he told them. "You will become soldiers in our great army. Forget your old lives. Forget your families. You belong to the Empire now." But Katie held her father's pendant tight in her small fist. She whispered to the other children when the guards weren't listening. "Earth will come for us. Our parents won't forget us. We just have to stay alive until they get here." Dr. Carter worked day and night in his archive, pulling out military manuals that hadn't been read in centuries. The knowledge was still good. Human tactics, human weapons, human ways of thinking about war that had once made them feared across this part of the galaxy. "We weren't always peaceful," he explained to the War Council. "Our ancestors were apex, predators. We survived by being smarter and more determined than anything that tried to kill us. That nature is still inside us, sleeping. The Vorlaks have awakened something they don't understand." The first new warship rolled out of Luna shipyards on a cold Tuesday morning. Admiral Price stood on the bridge of the Earth's Fury and felt power humming through the deck plates. The ship wasn't beautiful like the old explorers, but it was deadly. It carried weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop asteroid impacts. More ships followed. Righteous anger. Mother's love. Never again. Each vessel was crewed by volunteers who had never fought a real battle but burned with the need to bring their children home. Captain Ryan Stone's spies reported back from deep in Vorlak space. The enemy was preparing for humanity's response, but they expected the usual pattern. Most species fought desperately for a while, then surrendered when they realized they couldn't win. The Vorlaks had studied human history, but they had only looked at the last 3,000 years of peace. They thought humans were weak because they chose not to fight. They didn't understand that choosing peace was different from being unable to make war. This mistake would cost them everything. Admiral Price stood on her bridge and looked out at the growing fleet. 200 ships became 300, then 400. Humans who had lived their entire lives without violence now trained to kill aliens who had stolen their children. The age of human peace was ending. The age of human war was about to begin. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, 3,000 children waited for their parents to come save them. Katie Morrison crawled through the dark metal tunnel that ran beneath the prison floor. Her knees hurt from the sharp edges and her hands were bleeding, but she didn't stop. Behind her, Tommy Lou followed quietly. Tommy was 10 years old and came from New Boston Colony. He was small enough to fit through spaces that bigger kids couldn't reach. 6 months had passed since the Vorlax took them from their homes. 6 months of cold rooms, bad food, and alien guards who hit children for asking questions. The Vorlax tried to break their spirits with harsh training and scary punishments. They wanted to turn human children into obedient soldiers who would fight for the Empire, but the aliens didn't understand humans very well. Instead of breaking apart under pressure, the children grew stronger together. Katie had become their quiet leader, organizing secret meetings and keeping hope alive with stories about Earth. "How many kids are in Block 7? Katie whispered to Tommy as they crawled. "About 200, Tommy replied. "But Maria says there are more blocks we haven't found yet. Maybe 15,000 kids total." Katie's heart hurt thinking about so many stolen children. 15,000 kids from dozens of human colonies all trapped on this horrible world. But if they could talk to each other, maybe they could do something about it. The tunnel opened into a storage room filled with broken alien equipment. Katie and Tommy squeezed out and brushed dust off their prison clothes. Through a small crack in the wall, they could see into another cell block where children sat in rows forced to watch Vorlax war movies. Katie pulled out a small communication device she had built from stolen parts. It only worked for short distances, but it let her talk to kids in other parts of the prison. She pressed the button and whispered into the speaker, "This is Katie in Block 3. Can anyone hear me?" A voice crackled back. "This is Ben in Block 9. We hear you. The guards just changed shifts. You have 10 minutes." Katie smiled. The children had learned the guard patterns and found ways to move around the prison without being caught. They were becoming good at things their parents never wanted them to learn. Far away on Earth, Admiral Nancy Price stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the final preparations for war. The Earth's Fury was ready for battle, along with 400 other ships that had been built in record time. The fleet stretched across space like a metal cloud, each vessel filled with humans who had never fought a real war but burned with the need to save their children. Colonel Pete Davis walked through the Marine Training Center on Mars. 6 months ago, he had been a gym teacher on Europa Colony. Now he commanded the first generation of human soldiers in 3,000 years. The men and women training under him came from every human world. They were farmers and artists and scientists who had volunteered to become warriors. Remember, Pete told his Marines, "We're not just fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting to bring children home. Every alien we face is someone who helped steal those kids. Show them what happens when you threaten human families." The Marines nodded grimly. They had trained hard for this moment. Their weapons were charged, their armor was tested, and their hearts were full of righteous anger. Captain Ryan Stone's intelligence ships had been busy for months, mapping Vorlax space and studying enemy defenses. What they found was both good and bad news. The bad news was that the Vorlax Empire was huge and well-armed. The good news was that they were overconfident. "They think we'll fight like other species they've conquered," Ryan explained to the War Council. "Desperate but disorganized. They've pulled most of their fleet back to defend their core worlds, leaving their outer territories lightly guarded." Dr. Alex Carter had spent months digging through ancient human military manuals. The tactics were old, but the principles were timeless. Humans had once been the most feared warriors in this part of the galaxy because they thought differently than other species. They fought like pack hunters, coordinating perfectly and striking at weak points. "The Vorlax fight like single predators," Dr. Carter explained. "Strong and direct, but humans fight like wolves. We work together and we never give up." Admiral Price studied the battle plans one more time. The first target would be Vorlax Outpost 7, a supply station that supported the prison camps where human children were held. If they could capture it, They might learn exactly where the kids were being kept. On Vorlac Prime, Katie Morrison had finished mapping the entire prison complex. Using stolen tools and careful observation, she and the other children had figured out where all the guards were stationed, when shifts changed, and how the security systems worked. They had also found something important. The main communication center was only 3 levels above their cells. "If we can get to that room," Katie told the other children during a secret meeting, "we can send a message to Earth. We can tell them exactly where we are." The plan was dangerous. The children would have to overpower alien guards and fight their way through corridors filled with enemies. But they had advantages the Vorlacs didn't expect. The aliens thought human children were weak and helpless. They were wrong. The first human attack came without warning. Vorlac Outpost 7 was a massive metal structure floating in space, defended by energy shields and weapon platforms. The Vorlac commanders saw human ships approaching and prepared for a standard battle. What they got instead was something they had never seen before. The human fleet moved like a single living thing, each ship covering the others while they struck at precise weak points. Admiral Price had studied every piece of intelligence about Vorlac defenses and found the gaps. The battle lasted only 2 hours. When it was over, Vorlac Outpost 7 was in human hands, and its alien defenders were either dead or captured. The humans had fought with a combination of careful planning and fierce determination that left their enemies stunned. News of the victory spread through space on both sides. Human colonies celebrated their first military success in 3,000 years. Vorlac commanders began to realize they had made a terrible mistake by attacking humanity. On Vorlac Prime, the children heard about the battle through whispered rumors, from alien guards who didn't know the prisoners could understand their language. Katie Morrison felt her heart leap with hope. Earth hadn't forgotten them. Their parents were coming. But the children couldn't wait to be rescued. They had their own war to fight. Overlord Thecamar stood in his command center and watched reports of the human attack. For the first time since the war began, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans weren't fighting like any species he had conquered. They were fighting like something that wanted to hurt him personally. The Overlord looked at the security screens showing thousands of human children in their cells. He had thought taking them would make humans weak and desperate. Instead, it had awakened something terrible. The children were planning something. He could see it in their eyes when the guards brought them food. They looked at their captors the way young predators look at prey. The conditioning wasn't working. Instead of breaking their spirits, the harsh treatment was making them stronger and more dangerous. Thecamar realized that he had made the worst mistake of his long military career. He had stolen the children of a species that would never stop fighting to get them back. And worse, he had given those children time to learn how to fight back themselves. The war was just beginning, and already the Vorlacs were losing. Captain Ryan Stone crouched in the darkness of his stealth ship as it drifted toward Vorlac Prime. The planet hung in space like a red eye, surrounded by the largest concentration of alien warships in the galaxy. Somewhere on that world, 15,000 human children waited for rescue. Ryan's team included tech specialist Maria Santos, who had spent weeks studying captured Vorlac equipment. She worked quietly at her control panel, using alien codes they had stolen from Outpost 7. Her fingers danced across the keyboard as she prepared to do something no human had ever attempted before. "I'm in their defense network," Maria whispered. "The orbital platforms think I'm a supply ship bringing food to the prison camps. I can disable their weapons for maybe 20 minutes before they figure out what's happening." Ryan nodded and opened a communication channel to Admiral Price. "This is Shadow 1. The door is about to open. You have 20 minutes to get through." 300 light-years away, Admiral Nancy Price stood on the bridge of Earth's Fury and felt the weight of human history on her shoulders. Behind her flagship, 400 warships waited in the darkness between stars. Every vessel carried volunteers who had never seen real combat but would die before letting alien monsters keep their children. "All ships, this is Admiral Price," she said into her microphone. "Today we bring our children home. Remember your training. Trust your shipmates. Show these aliens what happens when they threaten human families." The fleet jumped into hyperspace toward Vorlak Prime. When they emerged near the planet, they found chaos waiting for them. Maria's sabotage had worked perfectly. Half the orbital defense platforms were offline and the others were firing at shadows, their targeting systems confused by false signals. The Vorlak home fleet was massive but unprepared. Their commanders had expected a desperate human attack, not the coordinated assault that hit them from 6 different directions at once. Admiral Price had divided her forces into 3 task groups, each with a specific mission. The main battle group engaged the enemy fleet in the space above the planet. Commodore Jack Turner led the second group toward military targets on the surface. Colonel Pete Davis commanded the third force, 50 ships filled with Marines whose only job was to find and rescue the children. The space battle became the stuff of legends. Human ships moved with deadly precision, each captain thinking 3 moves ahead while their alien enemies reacted to attacks that had already moved on to new targets. The Vorlaks fought with brute strength and superior numbers, but humans fought with the fury of parents and the cunning of apex predators. On the planet's surface, Katie Morrison crouched in a maintenance tunnel with 200 other children, listening to the sounds of battle echoing through the prison walls. For 8 months they had planned this moment, mapping every corridor and identifying every weakness in their captors' defenses. "The rescue ships are here," Tommy Lou whispered, his small communication device crackling with signals from orbit. "They're coming for us." Katie felt her father's pendant warm against her chest. She pulled it out and looked at the simple piece of metal that connected her to home. "Then we better help them find us." The children's uprising began exactly as planned. In 15 different cell blocks across the massive prison complex, human kids simultaneously attacked their alien guards. They used improvised weapons and tactics they had learned from forced military training, but mostly they fought with the desperate courage of young people who refused to be broken. Katie led her group through corridors filled with emergency lights and alarm sounds. The children had memorized the layout during months of careful observation. They knew which passages led to the communication center and which routes would take them to the surface where rescue ships could find them. The alien guards were caught completely off guard. They had expected the human children to be helpless, victims, not coordinated fighters who moved through the prison like they owned it. These kids had been studying their captors for 8 months, learning every habit and weakness. Colonel Pete Davis felt his assault ship shake as it broke through the planet's atmosphere under heavy fire. His Marines were strapped into their seats checking weapons and watching tactical displays that showed the prison complex growing larger ahead of them. "Listen up," Pete told his troops over the communication system. "Intelligence says the kids have started their own breakout. Our job is to find them and get them to the ships. These children have been through hell, but they're still fighting. Let's show them that Earth never forgot them." The Marines hit the ground running. They blasted through the prison's outer walls and fought their way toward the communication center, where Katie Morrison's group was making their last stand. The corridors echoed with the sounds of energy weapons and human voices calling for their children. Katie's group reached the communication center just as alien reinforcements arrived to stop them. The room was filled with blinking lights and strange alien machinery, but Tommy Lou had studied electronics before the war. His small hands flew over the controls as he tried to boost the signal that would guide rescue ships to their location. "I've got it," Tommy shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "I'm broadcasting our position to the fleet." Katie and the older children formed a defensive line at the door, using captured alien weapons to hold back the guards trying to retake the room. These kids had learned to fight from the worst possible teachers, but they had learned well. The rescue came like thunder. Colonel Davis and his Marines blasted through the ceiling and dropped into the communication center, their weapons cutting down alien guards with practiced efficiency. For a moment, the battle stopped as Marines and children stared at each other across the smoky room. Then Katie Morrison stepped forward, still clutching her father's pendant, and saluted the Marine colonel with military precision. "Katie Morrison, representing 15,000 human prisoners. We're ready for extraction, sir." Pete Davis felt tears in his eyes as he returned the salute. These weren't broken victims. They were young soldiers who had fought their own war, from inside the enemy's strongest prison, But their victory celebration was cut short by a new alarm that filled the complex with deafening sound. Overlord Thecamar had activated the Doomsday Protocol. Rather than let the human children escape, he would destroy the entire planet. "All units, this is Admiral Price," came the voice from orbit. "The planet is going critical. We have 30 minutes to evacuate everyone before Vorlak Prime tears itself apart." Katie looked at Colonel Davis with eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. "Sir, there are still kids trapped in the lower levels. We can't leave them." Pete nodded grimly. "Then we better move fast." The race against time had begun. 15,000 children needed to reach the surface before the planet died, and alien forces were fighting desperately to stop them. But the children had something their captors had never expected. They had hope, and they had help from home. The ground beneath Katie Morrison's feet shook as explosions rocked the prison complex. Through the broken windows, she could see cracks spreading across the planet's surface like spider webs. Overlord Thecmar's doomsday weapons were tearing Vorlak Prime apart from the inside, and they had less than 30 minutes before the world died. Colonel Pete Davis grabbed his radio and shouted orders to his Marines. "All teams, emergency evacuation. Get every child to the surface now. Leave no one behind." Katie led a group of children through collapsing corridors toward the lower levels where more kids were trapped. She moved with the confidence of someone who had memorized every passage in the prison during 8 months of captivity. Behind her, Tommy Lou carried a backpack full of explosive charges they had stolen from alien supplies. "The blast doors are sealed," Tommy said as they reached the entrance to the deep cells. "I can blow them open, but it'll bring the whole ceiling down." Katie looked at the metal barriers that separated them from 2,000 more human children. Through the communication system, she could hear scared voices calling for help. These kids had been in the worst cells, the ones reserved for children who wouldn't cooperate with Vorlak conditioning. "Do it," Katie said without hesitation. "We'll figure out another way out." The explosion shattered the blast doors and sent chunks of metal flying through the air. Katie and her team rushed into the smoke-filled passages beyond, calling out to let the trapped children know rescue had arrived. In orbit above the dying planet, Admiral Nancy Price faced an impossible choice. Her sensors showed that some evacuation ships were still on the surface, loading children as fast as they could. But the planet's destruction was accelerating. If she waited much longer, the entire fleet would be caught in the explosion. Lieutenant Commander Ben Walsh stood at his station on the rescue ship Hope's Light. His vessel was one of the last still on the surface, its cargo holds packed with frightened children who clutched stuffed animals and family photos they had somehow kept hidden during their captivity. "Admiral, this is Walsh," he said into his radio. "I've got 300 kids on board, but the loading ramps are damaged. I need 10 more minutes to get them properly secured." Nancy Price closed her eyes for a moment. 10 minutes might be too long. The planet's core was becoming unstable, and the energy readings showed massive explosions building beneath the surface. "Ben, you need to lift off now," she said quietly. "We can't risk losing everyone." "Negative, Admiral. These kids have waited 8 months to go home. I'm not leaving without making sure they're safe." Katie Morrison and her rescue team found the trapped children huddled in cells that were filling with smoke and debris. Many of the kids were younger than Katie, some only 7 or 8 years old. They had been the most defiant prisoners, the ones who refused to stop crying for their parents. "Listen to me," Katie told them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had become a leader through necessity. "We're going home, all of us, but we have to move fast and stay together." The children formed a line and followed Katie through passages that groaned and shifted as the planet continued to tear itself apart. Some of the smaller kids couldn't keep up, so the older ones carried them. They moved like a family, protecting each other the way they had learned to do during their imprisonment. Colonel Davis and his Marines fought a running battle through the collapsing prison. Alien guards, desperate and angry, tried to stop the evacuation even as their own world died around them. But the Marines had one advantage their enemies couldn't match. They were fighting for their children. On the surface, the last evacuation ships prepared for takeoff. Lieutenant Commander Walsh watched his damage control teams work frantically to repair the loading systems. Through the cargo bay doors, he could see more children running toward the ship, their faces black with smoke, but their eyes bright with hope. "Come on, kids," Walsh called to them. "Time to go home." The ship lifted off just as the final group of children scrambled aboard. Katie Morrison was among the last to board, making sure every other child was safe before she allowed herself to be rescued. As the ship climbed toward space, she pressed her face against a window and watched Vorlak Prime burning below. The planet's destruction was visible from orbit. Massive explosions split the surface and sent chunks of rock spinning into space. The Vorlak homeworld, center of an empire that had terrorized dozens of species, died in fire and chaos. But not all the rescue ships made it out. Hope's Light, overloaded with children and damaged by debris, struggled to reach escape velocity. Walsh pushed his engines beyond their safety limits, but the ship was too heavy and too slow. "Admiral, I'm not going to make it," Walsh reported, calmly. "Engine failure. I'm going to try something." Before Admiral Price could respond, Walsh made the decision that would make him a hero in human history. He aimed his crippled ship at the largest piece of planetary debris threatening the evacuation fleet and fired his remaining missiles. The explosion created a clear path for the other ships to escape. Hope's Light was destroyed in the blast, but Lieutenant Commander Walsh's sacrifice saved 3,000 children and their rescuers. The human fleet jumped to safety just as Vorlak Prime's core exploded. The shockwave destroyed everything within a light year of the planet, including the remaining Vorlak warships. The empire that had ruled through fear for centuries was broken in a single day. Katie Morrison stood in the medical bay of Earth's Fury and let the doctors examine her. She was 13 now, though she felt much older. Around her, other rescued children were being treated for injuries and malnutrition. Some cried with relief. Others sat quietly, trying to process the fact that their nightmare was finally over. But Katie knew something the adults were just beginning to understand. The children who came home were not the same ones who had been taken. They had learned things that peaceful humans weren't supposed to know. They had learned to fight, to plan, to lead others in desperate situations. Admiral Price visited the children's section of the ship and found Katie standing at a window, looking out at the stars. The girl still wore her father's pendant, but she also wore something new, the bearing of a soldier. "How are you feeling?" the Admiral asked. Katie was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad we're going home," she said finally. "But I keep thinking about what happens next. Earth has been peaceful for 3,000 years. We haven't. We can't just forget what we've learned." Nancy Price nodded slowly. She had been thinking the same thing. The children would need special schools, special programs. They would need to be taught how to live in a peaceful world after growing up in war. The fleet arrived at Earth to find crowds of millions waiting to welcome the children home. Parents who had spent 8 months in agony finally held their sons and daughters again. But many of the reunions were complicated. These children had changed in ways their families couldn't understand. Katie Morrison stood before the global assembly and spoke words that would define humanity's future. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear, and her message simple. "They took us because they thought we were weak," she said. "They were wrong. We were peaceful because we chose to be. But when someone threatens our families, we choose to be something else." The rescued children became the foundation of humanity's new military. They established schools where peaceful humans could learn the arts of war. They built the Terran Protectorate, an alliance dedicated to protecting other species from empires like the Vorlaks. Earth's 3,000 years of peace were over. But they had been replaced by something potentially more valuable. 3,000 years of justice, enforced by a species that remembered both the cost of war and the price of remaining defenseless. The children had come home, but they brought the future with them.